Hi there. Real quick before we jump into the episode. If you enjoy this episode, or any of the other episodes, be sure to give us a follow or subscribe. It would also be great if you shared it with a friend, or better yet, left a review so others can know how awesome it is. Thanks so much. And now, the episode.
Hey there, Press Starters, and welcome to the Press Start Leadership Podcast, the podcast about game-changing leadership, teaching you how to get the most out of your product and development team and become the leader you were meant to be. Leadership coaching and training for the international game industry professional. Now, let me introduce you to your host, the man, the myth, the legend, Christopher Mifsud.
Hey there, Press Starters, and welcome back to another awesome edition of the Press Start Leadership Podcast. On this week's episode, we'll be discussing what the game industry needs now. More empathy and less late-game capitalism. Why video game industry leaders must embrace empathy, reject exploitive late-game capitalism, and build sustainable studios through people-first practices. The video game industry has never been bigger. It generates billions of dollars in revenue, commands global cultural influence, and shapes how millions of people spend their free time. Yet, beneath the flashy numbers, record launches, and live service strategies lies a painful truth. The industry has prioritized late-game capitalism over empathy. Profit has become the North Star, while the human beings who create the games are often left struggling. Studios close suddenly after record earnings. Teams are overworked until burnout becomes inevitable. Players are seen as wallets to be drained rather than communities to be nurtured. The game industry is now at a crossroads. Do we continue on the path of hyper-exploitation, or do we rebuild an industry rooted in empathy, fairness, and long-term sustainability? This podcast argues for the latter. We need a lot more empathy and a lot less late-game capitalism. Leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives in the video game industry must realign priorities towards people, not just profits. To follow, we explore why empathy is essential, how late-stage capitalism is damaging the industry, and, most importantly, what actionable steps leaders can take to create healthier, more resilient studios and communities. The current reality of late-game capitalism in the game industry. When people talk about late-game capitalism, they mean an economic system that has become so obsessed with profit extraction that it sacrifices long-term stability, ethics, and humanity for short-term financial gain. The video game industry reflects this perfectly. Consider the following patterns. Record-breaking layoffs. In 2023 and 2024 alone, tens of thousands of game developers were laid off even as companies reported strong profits. Workers were cut not because projects failed, but because executives wanted to maximize shareholder returns. Crunch culture is standard practice. Despite years of outcry, crunch remains normalized. Studios routinely expect teams to work 60 to 80-hour weeks near deadlines, sacrificing health, relationships, and creativity. Exploitive monetization. Loot boxes, predatory microtransactions, and aggressive live service models have become staples. Player experience often takes a backseat to aggressive monetization strategies. Consolidation and homogenization. Mega corporations buy up studios and IP at alarming rates, limiting creative diversity and centralizing power in fewer hands. Short-termism. Leaders prioritize quarterly financial reports over long-term player trust or developer well-being. This is late-game capitalism at work. It extracts everything it can from both workers and players with little regard for sustainability. Why empathy is the antidote. If late-game capitalism reduces people to numbers, empathy restores humanity to the center of the game industry. Empathy in leadership means prioritizing the well-being of teams, respecting the trust of players, and acknowledging the impact that games have on culture. Here are 3 key reasons why empathy is essential. Empathy builds healthier studios. Leaders who cultivate empathy recognize that teams are not endless resources. They acknowledge burnout, respect boundaries, and create environments where people feel safe to take risks and be creative. This results in lower turnover, higher morale, and more innovative projects. Empathy strengthens player communities. Players are not just customers, they are communities. Empathetic studios listen to player feedback, avoid exploitative monetization, and design experiences that respect players' time and investment. This builds long-term trust and loyalty. Empathy ensures long-term sustainability. Empathy-driven leadership focuses on the long game. Instead of squeezing out maximum profits in the short term, empathetic leaders ask, how do we ensure our teams and communities thrive 5 or 10 years from now? Sustainable studios outlast extractive ones. The human cost of ignoring empathy. It is easy to think of empathy as soft or secondary to hard business realities. Yet, the absence of empathy carries serious costs for the video game industry. Burnout and attrition. The average career length for video game developers is significantly shorter than in any other tech industry. Talented developers leave because studios prioritize profit over well-being. Loss of trust from players. Aggressive monetization strategies may drive short-term profits, but often alienate players. Franchises lose loyal fans, damaging long-term growth. Creativity suffers. Crunch, fear, and instability stifle innovation. When developers are exhausted or fearful of layoffs, they take fewer risks. The result is formulaic games instead of bold new experiences. Instability in studios. Constant layoffs, mergers, and executive-driven pivots create fragile ecosystems. Studios collapse even after producing successful games. The cost of ignoring empathy is not theoretical. It shows up in declining trust, damaged brands, and an exodus of talent. Actionable step number 1. Redefine success beyond quarterly profits. Leaders must expand their definition of success. Instead of focusing solely on shareholder returns, consider additional metrics. Employee retention and satisfaction. Work-life balance indicators. Player trust and community engagement. Long-term revenue stability rather than short-term spikes. By reframing success, leaders send a clear message that empathy matters as much as earnings. Actionable step number 2. Normalize sustainable work practices. The first step to breaking free from late-game capitalism is rejecting the normalization of crunch. Empathetic leaders commit to sustainable work practices. Set realistic production timelines. Hire adequate staff for project demands. Respect boundaries around working hours. Encourage use of vacation days without stigma. A healthy team is a creative team. Sustainable practices protect both people and projects. Actionable step number 3. Build transparent communication. Empathy thrives in transparency. Leaders should share challenges honestly with their teams and engage players openly. Transparency builds trust and prevents the alienation caused by corporate spin or secrecy. Examples of empathetic transparency include holding regular all-hands meetings with an open Q&A, publishing development roadmaps for players, acknowledging mistakes publicly and committing to improvement. Transparency does not solve every problem, but it demonstrates respect for those affected by decisions. Actionable step number 4. Rethink monetization through empathy. Monetization strategies are often where late-game capitalism shows its ugliest face. Empathetic leaders should ask, does this model respect players or exploit them? Sustainable monetization practices include avoiding pay-to-win mechanics, offering clear value for purchases, respecting players' time by avoiding manipulative designs, prioritizing content quality over aggressive monetization cycles. When studios treat players with empathy, they build long-term loyalty rather than resentment. Actionable step number 5. Prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. Empathy also means recognizing who is often excluded or marginalized in the video game industry. Studios must take steps to create inclusive environments. And this includes diverse hiring practices, safe workplace policies, listening to marginalized voices in both teams and player communities, ensuring representation in games themselves. Empathy without inclusion is incomplete. A diverse, inclusive studio is stronger and more innovative. The role of leaders in changing the culture. Change begins at the top. Studio leaders, executives, and entrepreneurs in the game industry must model empathetic leadership. This means listening before making decisions, protecting teams from harmful demands, balancing financial goals with human well-being, celebrating people, not just products. Empathy-driven leadership is not about rejecting capitalism altogether. It is about creating balance. Profit and empathy can coexist, but only if leaders prioritize humanity as much as growth. Actionable step number 6. Involve developers in decision-making. One of the reasons late-game capitalism thrives in the gaming industry is because decisions are made exclusively in boardrooms, detached from the realities of development. Empathy-driven leadership flips this model by actively involving developers in major decisions. This can look like creating cross-functional planning committees for larger projects, involving senior developers in conversations about timelines and budgets, allowing teams to flag unrealistic expectations before they spiral into crisis. When developers have a voice, they feel ownership. Empathy means valuing their expertise rather than treating them as cogs in a corporate machine. Actionable step number 7. Invest in mental health and well-being. Empathy is not just about avoiding harm. It's about actively supporting people's well-being. Game development is demanding, but empathetic leaders make sure their teams have the support they need. Practical steps include providing access to mental health resources and counseling, offering flexible work arrangements such as remote or hybrid options, training managers to recognize burnout and respond with compassion, building a culture where asking for help is seen as strength, not weakness. An empathetic studio acknowledges that human beings are not endlessly resilient. They need support systems to thrive. Actionable step number 8. Embrace long-term thinking. Late-game capitalism thrives on short-term gains, but empathy thrives on patience. Leaders in the video game industry must adopt long-term thinking when building studios and franchises. Examples of long-term empathy-driven strategy: building communities around games rather than treating them as one-time purchases, investing in training and professional development for staff, allowing an IP to grow organically instead of flooding the market with rushed sequels. Patience requires courage. It is tempting to chase immediate profits, but true sustainability comes from long-term trust and stability. Actionable step number 9. Redefine leadership success. Empathy requires leaders to measure success differently. Instead of defining leadership by revenue milestones alone, empathetic leaders ask, did my team feel supported? Did we maintain healthy work practices? Did we deliver value to players without exploiting them? Did we build trust rather than erode it? Redefining success reshapes priorities. It encourages leaders to see empathy as core performance metric, not a side consideration. Actionable step number 10. Strengthen player relationships. Empathy is not limited to internal teams. It extends to the relationship between studios and players. Players are not just consumers. They are communities of people who care deeply about the games they play. Ways to show empathy towards players. Avoid manipulative mechanics like loot boxes designed to exploit addiction. Respect player time by avoiding grind force mechanics. Listen to community feedback and implement meaningful changes. Communicate delays honestly rather than pushing teams into destructive crunch. When studios treat players with empathy, they earn long-term loyalty. Respect builds communities, and communities sustain franchises. Actionable step number 11. Resist the pressure of over-consolidation. Consolidations have become a hallmark of late-game capitalism in the video game industry. Large corporations buy up smaller studios, cutting costs and maximizing control. While this may look profitable on paper, it often erodes diversity and creativity. Empathetic leaders resist the temptation to homogenize everything. They recognize the value of small studios, independent voices, and creative risk. Empathy means protecting creative diversity rather than absorbing it into corporate sameness. Actual step number 12. Build resilience through empathy. Resilience is often framed as toughness. In reality, resilience in the game industry comes from empathy. Teams that feel supported recover faster from setbacks. Players who feel respected stay loyal even after missteps. Studios that build empathy into their DNA can weather financial storms more effectively than those built purely on extraction. Resilience comes from relationships. The stronger the bonds between leaders, teams, and players, the more durable the studio becomes. Actual step number 13. Lead with transparency in layoffs and pivots. Sometimes layoffs or pivots are unavoidable, but empathy shapes how these changes are handled. Instead of sudden firings delivered by email, empathetic leaders communicate challenges openly before decisions are final, provide severance and job placement support, offer emotional acknowledgement rather than corporate detachment. Empathy cannot erase hard realities, but it can ensure that people are treated with dignity and respect. Actionable step number 14. Advocate for industry-wide standards. No single studio can dismantle late-game capitalism alone. Leaders must work collectively to advocate for industry-wide standards that prioritize empathy. This may include supporting unions and worker advocacy groups, pushing for legislation that protects against exploitative practices, Encourage publishers and investors to adopt sustainable funding models. Empathy is both an individual practice and a collective responsibility. Leaders must not only change their own studios, but also push for systemic reform. The long-term benefits of empathy-driven leadership. Shifting the game industry away from late-game capitalism and towards empathy offers tangible long-term benefits. Talent retention. Developers stay longer and bring their best creativity when they feel respected. Player trust. Franchises grow when players feel valued instead of exploited. Innovation. Healthy, supported teams take more creative risks, leading to breakthrough titles. Stability. Studios rooted in empathy weather market fluctuations more effectively. Reputation. Empathetic studios build positive reputations that attract both talent and investment. Empathy is not charity, it's smart leadership. Final thoughts. Reimagining the future of the game industry. The video game industry is at a tipping point. We can continue down the road of late game capitalism, prioritizing extraction and profit at the expense of people. Or we can choose empathy. We can build studios that respect developers, honor players, and create sustainable ecosystems that thrive for decades. What the game industry needs now is clear, a lot more empathy, and a lot less late game capitalism. Leaders hold the power to make the shift real. By redefining success, prioritizing well-being, involving developers in decisions, and respecting players, leaders can chart a new course. A healthier, more sustainable industry is possible, but only if empathy becomes the guiding principle. The future of the game industry is not just about technology or markets. It's about people, and people deserve better. All right, and that's this week's episode of the Press Start Leadership Podcast. Thanks for listening, and as always, thanks for being awesome.
Oh, hi. Man, the episode's over, but thanks for sticking around till the end. Be sure to check out more episodes in the playlist and new episodes every week on Monday. Follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to leave a review. Thanks again for being awesome.